Shalom, the name of God. Many people assume that God's name is God, but if we dig a little further, what does the Bible say? I'll be looking at God's actual name and the ancient documents that confirm it. It's our duty as believers to read about God, and when we read about God in the scriptures, we are exposed to the truth about what God told us to call him. We are first exposed to God's name with the children of Israel's exodus from Egypt. It is at this time that God speaks to Moses, who is given the task to lead Israel out of Egypt. Moses is told by God that his name is I am that I am. This is the name given to Moses after he asks God who he should tell Israel has called him to lead them out of Egypt. We find this conversation between God and Moses on Mount Sinai in Exodus chapter 3 verse 14. And God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am have sent me unto you. From this we see God establishing the actual name he wants to be called by forever. As we progress, you will see what I am translates to in the ancient Hebrew language, and that this is how we find God's name written in all the ancient manuscripts, whether the script is in Greek or modern Hebrew. As well as God telling Moses his name, he also makes it clear that it is important that we worship him and take his name seriously. We find this among the 10 commandments given to Israel from God. In the first commandment, in Exodus chapter 20 verse 3, Thou shalt have no other gods before me. And in the third commandment, in Exodus chapter 20 verse 7, Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. These commandments are both fulfilled when we endeavor to know God's actual name, because knowing his name makes it apparent which God we are serving. And when we know his name, we will be less likely to misuse it. Conversely, if we're not bothered about what God's name is, this can be seen as taking it in vain, because we are showing a lack of desire to know his actual name. We find scriptures that promote to us the importance of getting an understanding as believers. In Proverbs chapter 4 verse 7, wisdom is the principal thing, therefore get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding. In 2 Timothy chapter 2 verse 15, study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. From these scriptures, Proverbs shows us that we always need to get an understanding, and Timothy encourages us as believers to study to show our dedication to God. In this case, if we have a clear understanding of God's name, this is a direct fulfillment of the greatest commandment given to us by Christ. In Matthew chapter 22 verse 36 to 38, Master, which is the great commandment in the law? Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. So after being told this by Christ, there's no excuse not to find out God's actual name. Unfortunately, it appears that most believers are totally unconcerned about God's actual name. Some even claim that there's only one God, and that all religions lead to the same place, which is the very thing the scriptures denounce. In 1 Timothy chapter 2 verse 5, For there is one God and one mediator between God and men, the man Yahweh HaMashiach. We can see clearly from the scripture that Christ is God's mediator, and Christ himself also reiterates this. In John chapter 14 verse 6, Yahushua saith unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. When we look behind the surface of the word God, we find that it is a translation of the Hebrew word Elohim. It can be found in a Hebrew concordance at number 430, and it means judges, rulers, or divine ones. This finding rules out the word God as the name of God, and also proves that governments themselves can also be seen as gods. Now we know that God is not a name but just a title. Let's look at God's name in the ancient manuscripts available. Here we can see the name of God in this script from Psalms, with God's name written with the 4 Hebrew letters Yod-He-Wah-He in ancient Hebrew. This translates to I am, or more accurately, he is or he will be, which is the third person, because when God said I am, he was speaking in first person. So naturally, the Hebrews translated his name as he is, so as not to call themselves God. Here's a look at some artifacts with God's name written on them. These 4 letters can be found in ancient biblical texts, specifically the Dead Sea Scrolls and recovered Septuagint fragmented scripts. Here's a look at another ancient biblical text fragment of the Septuagint, which dates back to the 1st century. This document contains parts of Job 42. All these ancient manuscripts show us that God's name is written with 4 Hebrew letters, commonly called the Tetragrammaton. Now we have the name, it's important to sound it out correctly. Some of the popular names used are Yahweh and Jehovah. From these 2 names, the best pronunciation using the Hebrew letters is definitely Yahweh. But first, let's look at how the name Jehovah came about. This name was produced due to the translators attempting to translate the 4 Hebrew letters at a time when the Greek and English alphabet did not have letters to adequately match the Hebrew letter Yod and the Hebrew letter Wa. Initially, Jehovah was written with an I, because this was the closest sounding letter in the English alphabet to the Yod in Hebrew. It later developed to look like the J, and its sound also changed. The lack of a W in the English also meant the use of a V in the transliteration of the 4 Hebrew letters. Interestingly, V and U were interchangeable, and 2 U's later became the W that we now see in the English alphabet. The name being pronounced Jehovah could also be pronounced Jehovah. This would be more accurate as a transliteration, rendering a more accurate pronunciation, like some of the better ones such as Yahweh, 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 Yehovah, or Yahweh. So Jehovah is the product of an old transliteration which has not been updated. The alternative would have been to write the 4 ancient Hebrew letters wherever it appeared in the English translation, which is what we see in the Greek Septuagint and the Aramaic Hebrew manuscripts. Just as the V evolved into a W, the arrival of the J is also the evolution of the I, which also resulted in the new sound of the letter J. This letter only started to be prominent in the 1600s, which proves that Jehovah is not how the Most High's name would originally be pronounced. Initially, an I was used because it was the closest sounding letter to the Hebrew Yod, and as explained previously, it later became a J to give us Jehovah instead of Yehovah, which you can still find in old Bible translations, such as the 1611 King James Version of the Bible. I've kept this study short on purpose to focus on what God's name is and how it most likely would have been pronounced. It is not my intention to say that the pronunciation I have arrived at is exactly how God's name would have sounded. The name I have concluded and am convinced of with all my studies is Yahweh. I arrive at this name by sounding out the 4 Hebrew letters, Yod as Yah, He as Ha, Wa as U, and a He as an Ah at the end of a Hebrew word. I hope this edifies someone. Shalom, like, subscribe, and share this with somebody who needs it.